go. That'll get running pretty quickly. I can get running pretty quickly. That there. Pen. Okay. So that's squared up. Just on the slight delay with the opening roll. That will change over soon. All right. Excellent. Clear to go. Clear to begin. All right. Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Trilogy, also known as Byron of Sidious. Different banner today, in light of the fact that I am not monetized on YouTube. I don't meet the qualifications threshold. I've decided to go ahead and throw up the PayPal address there in the event, the unlikely event, anyone is interested in offering support that is in a fashion other than through a Rumble rant or a gifted subscription to the Rumble channel. But there is one other way that, if you are so inclined and are fiscally available to do so, that I would suggest, if you are interested at all in supporting my endeavors as a storyteller. And that is to head over to the storytellerscorner.substack.com and to become a routine reader at that location. There's also a number of my commercial works available for sale on both lulu.com and on amazon.com. Of those two options, I would always prefer that you utilize Lulu or go through the primary presses that I worked with previously for my earlier career stretches, and that would be booksforabuck.com and untreedreads.com. Even though I no longer work with Untreed Reads as an ongoing author, I do still receive royalties from previously contracted published works through their representation. So that is the finest method of offering support in that direction, is to buy yourself something to read. There's plenty of my work available out there, available for sale. Or, as I said before, you can head to the Substack, and I'll really quickly pop that back up instead. Oh, wait, that's designs. I need to go to the banners. Boop, boop. That would be here at the storytellerscorner.substack.com. If you head there, become a regular subscriber to the free written material that's available for your reading consideration in the genres of fantasy and horror, it would be deeply appreciated. And so we'll pop that back up there. And now we will go ahead and begin proceeding with the actual material that I wanted to cover today, that I wanted to talk about. And that is the cause du jour of the title of the stream. What happened to the heroes of fantasy? If you look at the shelves of most booksellers' fantasy sections in the current day, you will inevitably notice two things by glancing at the covers. If you're wondering, by the way, my eyes are straying a little bit. It's because I got the propped up notes that I jotted down for the show this morning. Firstly, most cover art has taken on the aesthetic of glossy, semi realistic, and quite frankly, looks a bit slapdash. Most of it does. Secondly, if the story's lead character is pictured on the cover, almost all of them these days are women. And the authors, also women. But as much as I hammered on the female coded and dominated nature of the genre the last few years, just a few days ago, I was talking about this trend in the publishing industry as a whole and the dominance of one particular demographic therein. This is not to say that there are no male protagonists out there. They still exist, mostly in the small press and the indie scene. But a brief reading of samples and previews of several of these works reveals something that seems pretty widespread in the current state of the genre's lead characters altogether, be they male or female. They are almost universally, almost, not entirely, but the vast majority of them, end up being revealed as resentful, petty, selfish cretins, framed as sanctified victims of a world that has repressed them and failed to recognize their awesomeness. About 3/4 of these characters are women and girls. They are usually some version of chosen one archetype character build, and they are, from what I can surmise, almost universally young and unattached, romantically speaking. The young and unattached part isn't much of a problem for me, since most cultures that produce leisure readers and literature of any sort tend to grant the young and the unattached a certain degree of deference or preference historically. What is a problem, however, at least for me, is that these characters often display levels of skill, power, or influence that do not match in any reasonable way that youth and inexperience. And far too many of them, especially the female leads, spend a fair amount of time fantasizing in story or engaging actively in some relatively raunchy or depraved sexual gratification. There is the whole book talk trend, if you're looking for any kind of evidence thereof, video playback of young women going into bookstores and talking about, holding up books that they have read and going, oh, well, in this one, the girl, she's taking back shots while the guy's half drowning her. It's exhilarating. No, that's depraved and degenerate. What are you doing? The pursuit of the artifact that will help Tabitha unlock the last secrets of her ancestrally inherited elven magic takes a back seat to getting back shots from Astravire, the dashing brigand who's really some disavowed bastard of noble house, some such or other. Laugh if you want at that bit. That is based on a 3-chapter look inside sneak peek that I read through of a top 10 listing on Amazon 2 weeks ago in the fantasy genre. This is what sells. We've always known for a very long time in marketing and advertising, sex sells. Why do you think throughout the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, every beer commercial had scantily clad women, young women in bikinis, bouncing around and laughing and tittering like a bunch of brainless bimbos, while the main actor in the commercial, the fellow who is shown actually enjoying the product or partaking of it, is just smiling ear to ear, a hapless inheritor of the grand awesomeness of being associated with this product. Because sex sells. It's a human impulse. I understand that. We all get that eventually. To not be able to comprehend that, I think you would have to be fairly blind to human nature, or you're willfully ignorant, or you're young enough that you don't quite understand exactly why it is that that has such powerful marketing effect. But it is singularly revolting that this thinly veiled smut is given a societal pass just because the titillation comes in the form of the written word and is cloaked in the trappings of, but there's more than just smexy time scenes. Sure, Abby, there is, and most of what's not a sex scene in these books could be better quality writing if it came from an 8th grade creative writing student who's only read a couple of books in the genre. The prose is about as well constructed as a slumlord's tenement building on the verge of being condemned as unfit for human habitation. Frankly, I imagine that there are people who are next to brain dead who can write more convincing prose and characters than 3/4 of what's out there and available and being pushed in our faces every time we go into a Waterstones or a Barnes & Noble. Belgian Dan, lubricated, medicated rumbler, says true. Sex, happiness, and perceived short-term fulfillment sells. Yes, they do. I am not ignorant to the power of market forces and how best to hook somebody in. I'm not ignorant of the tactics and techniques. I'm just completely unaware of how to make use of them myself because most of my material does not instantiate itself or predicate itself on being alluring or titillating in that fashion. But this is not an only female problem when it comes to characters in or even authors in the field. Just to be clear, though women do represent about 90% of the authors and characters that are at the heart of the issue here, because they represent 90% of it. But conversely, male authors indulging in this romanticy piffle trend are either also writing horned up female leads with even more graphic sex scenes, often implementing heavy use of BDSM or Dom sub dynamics in the characterizations, or they're featuring these flawless ubermensch sociopaths with harems of brainless devotee ladies who throw themselves at the main character because he's the most smexy, awesome, barbarian hero lead character. There's no flaws to these characters, and that makes them, in a word, boring. Greetings and salutations, Brother Cortex. Welcome once again. Thanks for popping in, brother. Good to see you here. Outside of small press and indie fantasy circles, primary and support protagonists in modern genre fiction works have lost all sight of duty, honor, allegiance, loyalty, and faith. When faith is included in these works, it usually involves dark gods, trickster gods and spirits, or thinly disguised mockeries of Christianity. If Tolkien or C.S. Lewis were alive to see the current state of the genre that they helped lionize and make potent in the 20th century, I imagine that they would gouge their own eyes out after reading 3 or 4 bits of this absolute drivel. Brother Cortex says he just got back from the gym. Making those gains, brother. Good to hear it. So that's my opening prepared statement / screed, grumble, ramble, rant, rampage, what have you. The state of the written word in fantasy genre fiction is terrible. And this is not something that's brand new to anyone who is involved in the realm of publishing, or as an author, as an editor, as an advertiser or a marketer, or as a reader. We're all aware of what's going on. Make those gains, Brother Cortex! And another facet of the fantasy genre that has been cropping up quite a lot for Dan, I watched 3 episodes of the first season of Rings of Power, and I checked out. I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep it up. I was like, nope, this is a no for me. It's revolting, and it's really discouraging to see just how much we have devolved. Dan says, sounds like we went from Twilight to 50 Shades of Grey. And you may remember, Dan, that E.L. James' 50 Shades of Grey started its life on fanfic.net or fanfiction.net as a Twilight fanfiction. It was so popular among the tween-age, young adult, female reading audience that tends to form up into hordes and mobs on sites like that and AO3, which is Archive of Our Own, that E.L. James thought to herself, well, if I just change a few names and locations and adjust it here and there, I could try to get this represented by a literary agent and published, and that's what she did. Much to the chagrin of anybody who has any decency or actual skill as a storyteller. She got a huge contract, she made bank, and it disgusts me. Cortex says, I saw a post of a chick asking why men with big muscles love 40K. Simple answer. We want to become Space Marines. Yeah. Space Marines in Warhammer 40K visually represent a male ideal of warrior strength and purpose. True, the Empire's purpose at a certain point may not sync up with reality. Yeah, no shit, Cortex. Brother, Dan and I used to joke all the time back in the halcyon days of blog TV that we wish that the Daywalker would show up and cut off Edward Cullen's fucking head and lay it in Bella's lap and say, here's your twinkly boyfriend, enjoy. It would have been amazing to see him and the rest of the Darkhold Redeemers drop into that setting and say, oh, we're going to clear house. Because with the exception of Werewolf by Night, who in Marvel Comics continuity had control of himself, and that was the primary reason why he was not hunted by the supernatural heroes of the Marvel Universe, like Doctor Strange and Ghost Rider and the Redeemers or Morbius, was because Werewolf by Night was conscious and in control of himself. So that's the reason he was not slaughtered by them or by Blade. But if Blade were to drop into that setting there in the middle of Stephanie Meyer's books, I would love to see him and the rest of the Redeemers just butcher all of those sparkly skin vampires and even the werewolves. Because I'm sorry, but that's... Yes! Brother Cortex bringing in another excellent reference. Anderson. And so Jesus Christ has risen. Amen. We shall see the likes of these freaks brought low, their heads rammed upon the pikes, circling the township that is our domain. we shall see them brought down. You think you're a worthy monster? Fucking love Anderson. Amen. You shall fall to the blades of the Iscariot organization. Alexander Anderson. The Iscariot, or was it the Iscariot organization or the Iscariot group? I can't remember. It's been a while since I watched the OVA Hellsing series or read the manga. But part of the reason why, and this is something that I don't think is well understood by the folks at Games Workshop who are currently in charge of it, or folks in the circle of fantasy genre fiction, generally speaking, even if they're just kind of dipping their toes in. A lot of those folks who are either casual fans of fantasy or are aware of it but aren't diehard fans of the history and the various properties that are out there available for reading or watching or playing in the genre of fantasy. Those who are, they seem confused about, well, what's the draw of Warhammer 40k? What's the appeal? Well, in a setting, in a world building setting of perpetual warfare and humanity being pushed to the very brink of existence while trying to combat ethereal and outworldly, otherworldly, hostile presences like the chaos gods, the entities that call the warp their home domain. These are impossible odds to strive against in the name of maintaining and expanding humanity. Men, generally speaking, need a purpose that involves or incorporates some element of protection or provision, because that grounds us with a purpose. We need a purpose. Every human being needs purpose. Men tend to have a strong draw to, or affinity for, or empathy for the purpose of defense, for protection. We are willing to go to war to defend and protect that which we hold to be true, to be noble, to be admirable, or at the very least, to be human. If humanity were to be beset by an external species threat that is sentient, as one can see in the science fiction setting of Mass Effect, when the Turians first, or when humanity first encountered the Turians, the men of most nations, according to the history of Mass Effect, yes, Lost Boys, Kiefer Sutherland, love that shit. In Mass Effect, in the history, in the lore, as originally written, it was the men of most human nations on Earth who were the first to go to the front line in the war against the Turians, in the First Contact War. The vast majority of soldiers involved in humanity's defense against this sudden alien threat were men. It is not that we are pre-programmed automatically for dominion or conquest, although that does have, men do have a tendency to lean towards conquest if they need to. But we stand the gap. We stand to defend. That gives us purpose. Some of us are men of faith, and we stand the gap to defend because that is what we believe God would call us to do. I know that not everybody in my audience is a person of faith. Brother Cortex, I know that you are not a man of faith. And I apologize because this is going to delve a little bit into that territory for a moment. But my duty as a father informs me that in accordance with God's will, if someone were to threaten my children, and the only options in the moment for a response were to either let them be hurt or to take the injury myself, I'm going to get hurt, period. That is my duty, is to stand the gap as their father. If someone is threatening to harm my children or my wife, I will stand the gap. It's my job to protect them. That is my duty. All men have an inclination towards this natively, instinctually. We are willing to sort of throw ourselves under the bus and be considered somewhat expendable. It is part of male nature. Why? Because we're not the ones on a timer in terms of replacing the species. It may not be a pleasant reality or fact to contend with, but it is a fact of reality. There's a certain degree of expendability to most men, and many of us accept it. We recognize it. We don't like it, but we accept it. It's another facet of modern fantasy genre fiction literature that I've come to somewhat despise, is that a lot of the protagonists in these modern fantasy stories, and I'm going to get growled at for this, but especially in fantasy that is forthright, written on behalf of and usually by members of the alphabet community, the male characters in those stories, they tend to be effete, selfish little cowards who will not put themselves in danger's way. And it's written off and claimed as, well, it's only logical to not want to get hurt. We don't want to get hurt either. But if the choice is us getting hurt, or the kids getting hurt, or our wives, or our friends and family, we'll take the bullet. That's our job. Conversely, however, we're not going to be inclined as strongly to do that if we understand that the society in which we live actively hates our guts. This is something that's in another realm. I don't want to touch on that too hard right now. I may come back to it in a little bit. But Dan says it perfectly right there. It's in many of our nature to protect our family, to just natively be the guardian. Back to Cortex here with the real vampires were in the Lost Boys. I have not watched that movie in a dog's age. I really need to revisit it. It's just a fantastic film. Although I may be looking back at it with rose-colored glasses. I don't know, because it's been years since I read it, or since I watched it. So it may very well be that it doesn't hold up. I don't know. It's an interesting little cinematic experiment for me to undertake, is to track down that movie and watch it again, because it's been at least like 15, 16 years since I watched it. Dan says shallow notes in the reading rainbows. Yeah, no shit. Um, Cortex, and I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I. Send me." Yes. I don't know what chapter and verse that is, but it sounds familiar. It's not because of my faith that it's not because of my faith alone that I would stand the gap for my own kids and for my own wife, for other members of my family. There are a handful of people, friends who I've had over the years, who I would also stand the gap to defend. My buddy Paulie, who I grew up with, I would stand the gap for him. He and his family have gone through some rough times lately. That guy has been through the ringer. And I would try to stand the gap for and defend him too. Unfortunately, he lives all the hell the way out in Buffalo, New York still, where I'm from. I'm here just south of the Twin Cities in Minnesota. The Eclectic Goat says, "Hello, popping in for a bit before I have to tend to the baby critters. Hope you are well." Well, thank you for stopping in, Goat. It is good to see you. I've been meaning to get into a couple more of your shows myself lately, but usually you are on in the afternoon when I'm at work. And unfortunately, I'm not the best about hopping from stream to stream when I'm at work. I usually just click onto one and I kind of stay there and just listen in. So my apologies for not being more active in the chat sections of your streams. But I do appreciate you popping in to say hello. Book of Isaiah, chapter 6. And Dan says Isaiah 6:8, if I remember correctly. That's a beautiful line. And I'm going to highlight that for a moment. Yes. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here I am," or "Here am I. Send me." It is our inclination. But as I was saying, in a lot of modern day fantasy genre fiction, there are male protagonists, be they primary or secondary lancer protagonists, who they're selfish, they're cowardly, or their decision to not stand the gap is explained away as, well, they're just being logical. Better to duck and dodge and get out of the way and live to fight another day. Really? Been rare I can get here during the day because I'm working. Darn real life getting in the way of my fun stuff. That's all right, you know. Look, I appreciate that you opted to take the opportunity to stop in for any period of time. For the folks on YouTube, you do have a lot of options, some tremendous options of who to watch. Goat, you and I are both in the Fringe Network or the Fringe Creator Network on Discord. We share that Discord in common, and there's a lot of very talented folks who are persistently throughout the day streaming. I'm sure there's somebody else who's streaming right now who's probably got a larger audience, who probably discusses things that are more relevant to news of the day and things that are more popular to discuss or talk about than the material that I touch upon. So I appreciate that even for a few minutes that you've decided to take the time, your time, that is precious to you, and you've opted to spend it and share it here with us and with me. And I appreciate that. To the folks who are watching or dip in on Rumble, right now we are in the time frame of the Rumble morning lineup, which features some of their largest content creators and channels, including Steven Crowder, Tim Pool, Russell Brand, Vince, who took over for Dan Bongino. So I know that there is a long, ongoing, persistent stream source that is much more relevant to news of the day and current events, tend to be a little bit more informative, and are just generally programs put on by people who are far more professional about presenting a stream than yours truly. But you have opted to come here and spend some time listening to me ramble. And I appreciate that as well. Your time is precious because it is finite. And yet you still chose to come here to hear a little bit about and chit chat fantasy and things bookish. And I will always appreciate that. My numbers may be low, folks, but every little bit is appreciated. Goat says, absolutely, I have to spend a mortgage payment on livestock grain. Yeesh. But I'll leave this running so you can get ours too. Well, I appreciate that, Goat. I'm not too worried about getting watch time totals on YouTube. I don't remember what the qualifications are to eventually meet monetization availability. I'm not too worried about that. It just happens to be another place where I can stream to from Rumble Studio, because Rumble Studio is what I utilize to do my streams. For a couple reasons. One, it's free. The best price for a guy who's got no budget like myself. So, thumbs up for that. But two, it's very user-friendly. And for a tech neophyte or Luddite like yours truly, I really appreciate that it's easy to pick up and use. Just click and go. Because then I'm not trying to bandy about and juggle all kinds of commands or technological button pushing, as it were, because I'm not great at that. Indeed it is, Dan. Belgian Dan, medicated, lubricated YouTuber, says free is the best price. You damn skippy it is, sir. So, yeah. Another facet, another thing that has happened to heroes in fantasy in a lot of the material that I've been reading based, in free previews from Amazon, because I've been doing this a lot over the last 3 or 4 weeks. The sneak peek look inside, I've been reading a lot of the opening chapters of various books just to see what are the current trends in the market. Besides all the heavy-handed smut writing and the low-quality characterization that I have noticed, something else that irks me, and this could be a personal irk, it's something that I'm kind of projecting a little bit. I'll be honest about that. I am projecting my irritation with myself doing this in my own writing onto other authors, and I should not do it. But it's helpful for me to recognize other people doing it and that it annoys me, because I can now work a little bit harder on not doing it myself, which is having characters in a deeply medieval style fantasy setting speaking in a dialectic pattern and mannerism that's heavily influenced by our current real-world culture and behavioral patterns. It's a little jarring. It pulls me out of the experience of being in another world, a fantastical world. Now, the current project I'm working on, American Minotaur, it's set here in America. There are fantastical creatures. The primary protagonist of that story is a young Minotaur, a Chaldean, because it is set in the same framework as the novel American Goblin, which is available at lulu.com and amazon.com by yours truly. Haha! Promo! Gonna do the Belgian Dan and the Lucian, what they enjoy. Buy my book. Buy my book. Matter of fact, I think I've got that one. Oh, I don't have that graphic on here. I got to add that graphic later on. I'll add it later. Not gonna muck about with that right now. but yes, it's fantastical creatures. Yes, it does involve elements of high fantasy, but it is set in the framework of our modern, real American Earth setting, just with a lot of fantastical elements dropped in because of the framework of the Outworlders and them getting pulled into our reality. More on that another time. But yeah, it's a minor quibble. And it's a quibble for me because I know I'm guilty of it myself, and I shouldn't do that. So it's an area for me to improve upon in my own material, and I'm going to try to be a little bit better about that. Because it's a bad habit to get into too much. And I'm not talking about, cussing, because cuss words are just, they have their time and place. I'm talking about characters who utilize modern Western culture slang. It occasionally crops up into my own work, and I see it a lot in these fantasy works that are dominating the market on Amazon and at Barnes and Noble, and even some of the books I pick up at half-price books, because they're slightly newer. They're in the genre of fantasy, and the people writing this stuff, they're doing the same damn thing. Yeah, oh my God, Dan. Belgian Dan says, I can't wait to hear Merlin yell YOLO one day. No, absolutely not. Even that terrible television adaptation on Sci-Fi Network, Merlin, didn't lapse that far into modern aesthetics, thank Christ. Cortex says, humanity first will always be my motto in any space universe involving aliens or in medieval universes against creatures or monsters. In most settings, I tend to say the same thing. Why? Because I have an in-group preference. Brother Cortex. This one, I like this one, because this one is actually a bone of contention amongst a lot of cinemaphiles. He says, if you were to ask me who were the good guys in James Cameron's Avatar films, I will always say the humans. And he says, my imperial mindset is strong. That, my good sir, is because you have what is referred to as a logical in-group preference. What is in-group preference versus out-group preference? This is something that is fundamentally psychological. It's sociological as well. A lot of people make commit the unforced error of saying it's a political frame of mind. No. Starship Trooper, says Dan. Yes, that as well. It's not a political mind frame. It's a psychological frame of reference, which impacts and affects your stances and perspectives sociopolitically. A person's individual or independent psychology plays heavily into their sociopolitical perspectives, stances, behaviors, and voting patterns. When you have an in-group preference, it is your your personal recognition that advocating for policies or behaviors culturally, or that advocating for behaviors culturally or policies sociopolitically that benefit the group of people to which you belong is logical because it ensures your best odds for survival. And Goat, I am going to disagree with you here. That is logical. There is an emotional element or facet to it, yes, but it is pure logic at its core. The best way to ensure your own survival and your own benefit is to hold a perspective that puts groupings to which you personally belong to a beneficial light and to promote those cultural practices and behaviors or socio-political policy positions. It is logical because if you are in the outgroup when a cultural behavior or practice is engaged in by the majority, or it is accepted by enough people that it forms a portion of the plurality around you, you can easily become the victim of it if you stand outside of that grouping. It's not logical to promote or be on board with a policy or a behavior that will target you and be a detriment to your continued survival. Cortex says Jake betrayed his side for some jungle tale. Just saying. Oh, you're talking about Avatar, right? The desire for our continued survival, Goat. And again, I'm going to offer gentle pushback. It is a biological urge. It is neurologically wired into all human beings to support and maintain their own continued function. That is hardwired logically. It's not logic in the form of thinking something through mathematically or formulaically. It is the logic of if you do not do this, you will not proceed. There is an involuntary reflex that demands we ensure our own continuation for the propagation of ourself and our species and to maintain the continuation of our consciousness. This is neuroelectrically wired into our brains. That is almost mechanical. I don't mean logic as in saying, well, let me reason through this step by step. No, it's instinct. Instinct is a form of logic. It's hardwired into us neuroelectrically. No, no, okay. I see what you're saying. I'm sorry, Goat. I thought you were trying to argue that it is pure emotion. And that's what I mean when I say it's logical. I mean not from an academic sense of logic. I'm speaking of the biological, neurochemical, or neuroelectrical impulse to maintain continued function. There is a differentiation there. There is an emotional component to it, but there is also a heavy logical component to it. It's not one or the other. There is an admixture. It's not purely logical. It's not purely emotional. It is an averaging. Yes, Goat. You are relying upon the textbook definition of logic, making a decision based only on facts. Are you familiar with spinal cord reflex neurological input, or reflex action. If somebody cocks their fist back at me, I'm going to flinch back. I didn't think that through. I didn't predicate my flinch back or my dodge or avoidance or evasion on saying, oh, the fact of the matter is that person is going to punch me. I saw a movement and my body had a reflex action predicated on hardwiring. Because if I don't move back, my body's going to take physiological damage. I'm not thinking that through or reasoning it through. There is data that I recognize as standard input, but I'm not thinking about it. And there's no emotion involved to it. It is input data. I'm about to be struck. That will damage my capacity to continue function at maximum capacity. There's no emotion to it. It is just reflex. That is nerve level logic and biological programming that is predicated on the fact that someone is about to rear back to hit me. My body reacts without me thinking about it and without feeling anything about it. It's simply responding to, here is an input that will be damaging and harmful to me. I may get angry. I may be afraid. That's the emotional component of the flinch back. I'm not looking forward to taking that damage. So yes, that is an emotional response. But the emotional is predicated upon the fact, the logical component of this admixture, that if I don't move, I will receive damage. Goat says, yes, but many instincts are not logical and can, in fact, be harmful. For instance, if a cat bites you when you pull away instinctively, you actually take more damage. Yes, but that is based upon the physiological design of a cat's teeth, having that rear-facing hook, that angled hook. Evolutionary design has altered the shape of the cat's tooth, predicated upon the instinct of most prey or most other animals to pull away. That actually hooks the tooth in further. That evolution on part of the feline, that was not based on an emotion. That was based on, over time and over the course of many generations, in order to best secure prey, the tooth should hook in. It's a mutation it's a mutagenic adaptation that has a logical purpose. It's centered upon ensuring better capture of prey to secure food. And Goat does make a fair point here too. Conversely, and this is why it's not purely logical, it's not purely emotional. There have been people who choose to die in extreme situations because they refuse to broach certain personal guidelines of expectation and behavior and what they will or will not put up with. They won't drink urine, they won't eat human flesh. They are making a choice that will result in their demise. And it's very exceptional that people will make that choice. And bear in mind, Goat, that I am not speaking in absolutes here, or I'm not trying to. I'm trying to point out that, broadly speaking, most people will do the thing that makes them revolted to ensure their survival. Most will. That doesn't make my point invalid. My point was that instincts are not logical because the instinct is to pull away, but the logic is not to pull away. Yes, but again, you are predicating this on the individual case of a feline attacker that has that evolutionary component to their teeth being hooked backwards. The vast majority of predatory animals that will attack human beings do not have that back-facing hook design in their teeth. Most predatory animals that will bite us don't have that hook on their teeth. So the logic is to pull away in the vast majority of instances. Having a singular exception to that general rule does not negate that it is logical to pull away. Because in the vast majority of our understood biological history, when you are bit at, you can pull away. That is the general expectation. When you have a singular instance or two or three instances, those are exceptions to the historical data. That does not make it illogical to pull away. It makes it an exception to the expected pattern of historical data and behavior. And pattern recognition is how we have survived. Oh, it's been dog years since I read Dune, Goat. That is on my list of many books that I have to reread. God, I meant to go back and reread it when the first movie came out, and I just didn't get around to it because my to be read list is rather lengthy and includes about half of that fucking shelf right there, and then another half of that shelf. Well, actually, like 3/4 of that shelf up there. Although I gotta say, I'm not gonna read the Shatner books. I just got those from my buddy Jason because he was trying to get rid of them. Yes, Dan, variety is the spice of life. I am, by the way, and I should say this. I should preface this outright. I'm not a very bright guy. So there are a lot of ways in which, and a lot of areas of conversation, intellectually speaking, that I'm going to falter. I'm going to come out looking and sounding like an idiot. Oh, not a problem, Goat. But I enjoyed this back and forth, this exchange, even though we were in diametrically opposed disagreement, because I can see the perspective that you're coming from, and because you are offering solid, sound argumentation from your perspective and your take on this subject. And I am trying my best, and trust me, I'm floundering a little bit, to try and maintain, with what little information and knowledge I have under my skull cap, how to respond. It's challenging because I'm an idiot. So I appreciate your patience with me in this regard. Sardaukar for life. Thank you, Dan. And again, thank you, Goat. I take it as a compliment that you're enjoying the conversation. Again, even though it's a little bit more argumentative than I'm used to engaging with in these streams, it's largely because I disagree, but I'm on thin ground for myself. I'm pushing my knowledge base to its absolute edges. Cortex, the Emperor's blades. Sorry about that. hacking along because I'm tossing a dart. It should be goat. Yes. I'm going to highlight that. The ability to disagree politely and to be able, if I may, throw in a quick editorial, and to be able to disagree and counter the perspective of your conversational partner, not opponent, your conversational partner. And there is a distinction there. I talked yesterday, the theme of my show yesterday was the words you choose to use matter. Most people, when they have these disagreements, these conversations, these debates, these back and forth exchanges, they refer to the person they're talking to or that they're in opposition with in a particular subject matter. They say, my conversational opponent. Well, that's putting it into a combative framework. Why not, especially if you actually enjoy the other person's company and conversation and are willing to hear them out, why not frame it as my conversational partner? Particularly in an instance like this. Because I would have to say that this exchange has been Goat agreeing to be my conversational partner without an overt framing it in that way. And I deeply appreciate that, Goat, for partaking of that. Shit, where was I? I started saying something and then I went off on that sideline tangent. I have a bad habit of doing that. Sorry. And I know it was going to be something related to Warhammer, too, to 40K. Oh, right. Okay. I'm still relatively amateur level, very surface level familiarity with 40K, and most of my service level familiarity with material has been compliments of the good brother Cortex. The more short stories from the first two collections of short stories that I've got from the 40K universe, the more I'm coming to understand that. And yes, Belgian Dan says instead of a debate, it's a thought provoking interaction or conversation. Very much so, which I appreciate. It gives me an opportunity to flex the brain muscle, as it were. The more I'm coming to recognize as I'm reading these short stories, I would not survive very long in the 40K universe. I just wouldn't. Not only because I'm in terrible physical shape and condition, that's a big factor, trust me. The idea of trying to lead a life wherein there is any amount of joy just seems borderline impossible. Just from the stories, the handful of short stories I've read thus far. Unless you are an absolute war-driven barbarian, or you are a guardian whose entire persona and ego rests on the concept of I will engage as a warrior, as a soldier for the Imperium. If that's the only driving force or motivation in your existence, it's kind of a shite existence. And it's part of why I'm struggling a little bit to enjoy the material at all. it's yeah. To say it's harsh is putting it lightly. And I'm trying to find any way in which to empathize with the characters in these short stories, because, and it's probably because the authors are trying to maintain a mental framework predicated upon the lore and the mythology previously established. I only know what you have told me about the Unification Wars, Cortex. Um, but because the authors of the short story collections are trying to maintain an awareness of the world building framework of the 40K lore, many of the characters that they have written or that they're creating in these stories are very wooden. They're very two or one dimensional. Many of them are not entertaining. They're not engaging. I don't care about most of these characters. I just don't care. There's no personality to them. It could be a matter of these authors maybe weren't very talented. I don't know. It could be that they're intended to be easily replaceable cogs in the war machine. As an overarching narrative tool, if that is the intention, it's very well done. If the intention is for me to not give a shit about these characters, bravo. But I am not the sort of person who is going to take any joy in engaging with material that I am not intended to care about. If there's no character for me to attach to as a narrative focus, then I'm going to end up stepping away. Now, that's what I was wondering about, brother, is if the actual novel length stories are better written material, higher quality. Certainly, I kind of felt that way when I was reading the Witcher series. Like, yes, it was a single author, but the first couple of short story compilations, there were a couple of stories that were hit or miss. A couple of Geralt's adventures were kind of lackluster. But I kept going because enough of them were engaging and entertaining enough, or had interesting enough creatures and side characters, that I thought, okay, this contributes to a really entertaining greater whole. So I stuck with it and got through the first couple of full-length novels in the Witcher series of books. So it's my expectation that the novels of 40K will be more engaging for me. You're not the only person who has who's said that to me, Brother Cortex. That the first Horus Heresy book, like the first couple of them are really great, but that the very first one is like a standout to get you into the series, to get you into the franchise. I'll be right back. I gotta hit the loo. Back momentarily. I'm gonna throw on really quick some royalty-free music here. Actually, I say royalty-free, but that's a whole other story. Um, here we go. Back momentarily. Callous bones, that's your stage. Day by day, we set the wage. You write rules and fancy ties, but don't forget where the spine you ride. What happens when we doubt our tools when we step away from feeding fools. You need us more than we need you. Don't forget it or you'll learn it's true. Used to find whiteheads in the clouds, but down here we're tough and proud. You papers mean nothing when shells are bare. When folks like us just stop to care. The salts of earth can't be replaced without us. You're a house raised. Keep ignoring what we do. You'll miss the hands holding up your view. What happens when we doubt our tools? When we step away from feeding fools? You need us more than we need you. Don't forget it or you'll learn it's true. What happens when we doubt our tools? What happens when we doubt our tools? When we step away from feeding fools? You need us more than we need you. Don't forget it or you'll learn it's true. Happens when we doubt our tools, when we step away from feeding fools. You need us more than we need you. Don't forget it or you'll learn it's true. What happens when we doubt our tools, when we step away from feeding fools? You need us more than we need you. Don't forget it or you'll learn it's true. Okay. Sorry about that. Nature called. Nature called, and that's not a call that I will ignore for very long. I'm 43 years old, and if I wait too long, I'll end up pissing my pants. And I'd rather not do that. I don't want to already prove to be incontinent at just 43. Would not be pleasant. So yeah, I've got 40K stuff I've got to start reading. I gotta get back to the first Book of Swords by Fred Saberhagen, because I've got the first trilogy in its entirety. And wait, hold on. I've got the first book in the initial trilogy upstairs, but this is the first Book of Swords trilogy by Fred Saberhagen, and then there is the Book of Lost Swords series, which is 7 books in total that I have got to get. I've got to start reading these, but I've also promised people on Substack I'm going to start reading some of their short stories or chapters for review purposes. So many books, so little time. But I really got to get working on that. Yeah, exactly, Dan. Only so many hours in a day. Now, Brother Cortex, would you say 30K and 40K are your biggest guilty pleasures? Or is Crossed your biggest guilty pleasure? Because I've not read any of it yet, but just from the shit you've told me about it, that's a guilty pleasure. There's so much stuff to take in as a nerd, and only so much time to devote to any of it. And much to my shame, I have not been as active as I should be as a reader. I've been on here doing these streams. If I knew it was good for me, you know what I would be doing instead of doing this stream right now is I'd be working on either American Minotaur, my own writing, or I'd be kicking back and reading something while the kiddo's down for her nap. But I do enjoy doing these streams and chit-chatting with folks and talking bookish things. But I'm going to start the rundown process. Demonic grin intensifies. Oh, Dano apparently is familiar with Crossed. I figured you two would have some marks of commonality here. Good to see. Good to see. Dan, I forget. Let me take a look, see at my Discord. Do you have Discord, Dan? Do I have you on there? If I do, I'm a schmuck for not remembering. Interesting. What do we got here? New streaming. Okay. Oh, the common nerds hopped on. Okay. You were telling me a little bit about the sadness yesterday, brother. I gotta check that out too. But I am going to start winding down for the day, gentlemen and lady, because Goat is she still listening in the background? So any last questions, comments, concerns, prompts, anything to bring up? Oh, that's right. There was one other thing I wanted to briefly bring up and mention, but I'll hold on to that for a moment. Okay, let me check my Discord, Dan. My friends list. Oh, I do have you on here, Dan. If this is still you, I got you. Belgian Dan. But yeah, Dan, Cortex, you guys should definitely conversate via the Discord as well. It's always good to have cross reference amongst these folks because you guys are awesome. Okay, something really quick. I'm gonna bring up, briefly mention Grok. While I am not a huge fan or proponent of LLMs, large language models, in terms of the whole AI thing, I'm very sketchy about AI on general principle. I'm a little skeeved out by the concept. But certain near AI tools have their place. And I hopped on my X yesterday, and I've only used Grok a couple of times. I found myself thinking, I wonder if there's something that I could use Grok for that. Oh, Dan, I have not yet gotten into Berserk, but I've had a lot of people recommend it to me. I've had a lot of people recommend, especially my buddies at work who are like big anime fans. They have all recommended I get into Berserk. That's another one. Jesus Christ, I just got so much stuff I got to get into. So little time. But I did play Guts Rage, Sword of the Berserk for the Sega Dreamcast, which was years ago, which is how I first became familiar with or aware of the Berserk as a series. The Mandragora. Right, Grok. So a lot of people, myself included, are not fond of the idea of AI being used in writing. We're especially uncomfortable with it being used for the creation of material that is commercially published. And it's all over the goddamn place. People have been utilizing ChatGPT to write academic papers for a couple of years now. Many people have been caught out doing it, called to the mat, and either punished for it with expulsions from school or suspensions from school, failed grades at different universities and schools. And I say, bravo, good that they're punished for trying to cheat the system. There have been a number of writing contests, fiction writing contests, where people have been submitting work that is 3/4 to 90% written by LLMs, by AI. They feed a couple of prompts into these programs, into these algorithm nightmares, and they pump out ad nauseum large chunks and swaths of material that are getting submitted to and are winning creative writing contests. That's perhaps a sad statement on the level of degradation of skill in the pool of current day storytellers. I think it says more that they can't match the level of skill of an LLM, but I digress. A lot of people have been trying to cheat using AI or LLMs. And I found myself curious, thinking, well, wait a minute. There's a way to reverse this. Isn't there? Or shouldn't there be? So I hopped on my X account. I went to Grok. And I posed a question to Grok. I said, hey, I'm wondering if a particular task is within your capacities. I am a creative author, or a creative writer. I am a genre fiction author. Rather than me, the human, feeding a prompt to you and having you generate a story based on a prompt, can you give me a couple of short story idea prompts? Writing prompts have been a thing for a very long time. A lot of people use them to exercise their creative writing skills, to challenge themselves to particular tasks, and to try and expand their tool set as storytellers. So I asked Grok, can you give me a few short story prompts in the speculative fiction genres of weird horror or weird fiction, cyberpunk, alternative history, and deep or grimdark fantasy? And Grok responded saying, hey, that's a great idea. I'd love to see if I can flex some creative muscles. And then there was a pause. There was a pause of almost a full minute. And then it shat out these short story prompts and followed it up by saying, is there anything here that interests you as a storyteller? If so, by all means, go ahead and use it. And I read through the prompts and I was interested. I was fascinated reading through a couple of these prompts. And I said, okay, for my own edification and clarification, in order to ensure that I do not inadvertently step on somebody's toes, a colleague in the field of genre fiction storytelling, are any of these prompts heavily or in majority predicated upon or based upon other already extant books or short stories that have been published and are available in the market. And there was another pause, and Grok came back and said, no, but they are predicated upon common tropes, themes, and concepts cribbed from or borrowed from trends in the published material over the course of the last 10 years. But none of them are direct copies of stories that already exist. They are general prompts based on tropes and generalizations. I thought, okay, interesting, good. I'm going to make use of one or two of these as a creative writing work exercise to write a couple of short stories or novellas. Thank you. I don't know what will come of it, but I picked one that I've already changed a little bit of the framework from the prompt. It just was kind of a thought generation tool to get me thinking outside of my usual framework, because I usually write fantasy in the area of the Templarian Tales series. And when it comes to my horror, I've been doing a lot of Amelia City horror. Staying in those two series, I want to kind of break out of my usual frameworks a little bit and do a standalone story that has nothing to do with any of my other previously established material. When I wrote American Goblin, that was a standalone story that had nothing to do with any of my other work. When I wrote The Big Tour, it was a standalone story. It had nothing to do with any of my other previous work. And I deeply enjoyed writing those stories. And when I was done with them, they were done. Yet now I find myself writing a follow-up, not a follow-up, but a spiritual sequel or spiritual successor to American Goblin with American Minotaur. But again, based on the actual character, the primary protagonist in American Minotaur, very different set of circumstances, and a different overall theme for that story. But it is predicated upon the framework of the world building I already did in American Goblin. So it's slightly easier to work on that story when I have the time, because I already have established a framework in which the story is set. Well, now I'm going to be doing something completely different. And yes, Dan, I'm thus far, I'm intrigued. I think I'm going to have fun with this as an experiment. And if it turns out that I enjoy the end result and that the end result is enjoyable, here's my game plan with that prompt. The story I end up writing based upon the Grok prompt, if I get it whipped up and ready to go in a couple of weeks' time, my intention is to read the resulting story aloud here on stream. And that will be a presentation for a live audience. Depending upon if that is well received, I may make that a regular thing. Maybe once a month or every other month, I'll say, hey, time for a story inspired by Grok, where instead of me, the storyteller, the author, cheating and using an AI or an LLM to produce my story for me, the LLM will give me the initial fodder, the initial seed to plant, and I will grow the narrative for you, the audience. I understand that in some ways that may be like, oh shit, you're working on behalf of the machine. Now it's the master feeding you the prompt. No, I'm just a storyteller looking for some new ways to clown around with the written word. But anyhow, I'm going to grab one more dart. It's approaching the time where I need to get the kiddo up for lunchtime. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Parasite's that's an anime and a manga, right? Because that's another one I've seen some panels from, and I thought looked interesting. Oh, brother! Oh God, I didn't even see this when you mentioned it like 10 minutes ago. Gungrave, Brandon Heat. Gungrave is some amazing shit. Of the series that you wrote there, Berserk, Hellsing, Gungrave, Tokyo Ghoul, Attack on Titan. The only one of the there's two of those that I've actually watched: Hellsing and Gungrave. And Gungrave is sorely underloved, underappreciated. I'm sorry, I loved Gungrave. Brandon Heat, the Code of Iron. Dragging that giant fucking coffin that's got his armaments in it and is itself a giant fuck you cannon. Love that. Covenary of the Iron Fortress. Maybe check that out. You see, there's so much shit. I'm only one guy. I've only got so much time, so many hours in a day to watch and listen to and read different shit. Ah! Here's the thing about Gungrave. I didn't know it was an anime until after I had played the PlayStation 2, the first game for Gungrave. I was playing it, and this was years ago. I was playing the game, and my buddy Chris was like, that's based on an anime, right? I'm like, are you fucking serious? Get out of here. So I tracked it down, and I watched it, and holy buckets, I loved Gungrave. Devil May Cry, I would be more interested in watching the show if I had played more than just two of the games. I've only played two of the Devil May Cry games. I played the first one, and I played the fourth one. I haven't played any of the other Devil May Cry games. That's on me. I don't want to get into watching the show unless I familiarize myself with the prior material first. That's my shortcoming on that one. But anyhow, I am going to go ahead and wrap up. Gentlemen and or ladies, if you are present, I am going to recommend, if you are looking to hop onto another stream after I close up here, Yarn Witch is currently playing Mortuary Assistant on her stream on YouTube. And then there is The Common Nerds. The Common Nerds is streaming on both Rumble and YouTube. So regardless of which site you prefer to use or where you're watching this at right now, you have a landing spot to watch The Common Nerds. He is streaming right now. And he's a good gent. I enjoy his material. So I'd highly recommend either hopping over to The Common Nerds or to Yarn Witch. Either of them. They tend to cover pop culture, video games. They also talk anime and manga a little bit, cartoons, comic books, the same sort of things that I, as a nerd, take a deep interest in. So they're both good shows and programs and content providers who I can amiably and happily say, when we're done here, if you're still relaxing, you have the opportunity to go ahead and chit chat. Or Brother Cortex, if you are going to go live, I would also recommend that you look to possibly looking for Brother Cortex on YouTube to follow his gameplay or chit chat, whatever it is he's going to cover. Also a possibility if he does decide to go live. So those are your options that I would personally recommend hopping over to. Ladies and gentlemen, fantasy is not dead as a genre. There are still heroes worthy of our admiration and our respect in the fantasy genre. Sometimes you have to go back to older material to find it. You can't go wrong with Terry Pratchett in the Discworld novels. Much as he can get a little purple prosy, you can't go wrong with Terry Brooks. You definitely can't go wrong with Stephen R. Donaldson, with Raymond Feist. There, Jim Butcher in the Dresden novels, fantastic fantasy genre fiction to get into, with a strong male lead protagonist. Although the Butcher novels or the Dresden novels are written and presented in the first person perspective, I tend as a reader to prefer third person omniscient, but that's minutia. They are very well written, so I can enjoy them, and I imagine that you would as well. So for any kind of reading recommendation, you know, Jim Butcher, the Dresden novels, also a hearty recommendation for those. This is a little bit dusty. I gotta clean up down here. But anywho, that's gonna do it for me, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I ask that you take care of yourselves, and as always, keep reading.